Good morning and welcome. It's great to be together again. Hope you've had a few moments for your hydration break and are feeling better. But it is good to be together. My name's Sam, and a warm welcome. Looking forward to carry on our series, More Than a Game, this morning. And if you've missed any of the big Sunday messages, they've all been big, definitely. If you've missed any of them, you can catch up with them on our YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast platform. Now, football clubs often talk about home advantage. You know, teams often play better when they're playing at home. They have greater crowd support, and these are places where memories get made, and victories and losses can be celebrated and commiserated there. People grow up supporting their team, and perhaps this building has been a bit like that for us over the last few years as we've been here. And if you've been around the last few weeks, even just this morning, you will know and be aware that next Sunday, in fact, will be our last service here as we move on and move out into a new space and the next chapter in our story, which can be daunting, but also exciting. And this week, I realized something. I realized this is the 40th time that I've come up here to share a message in the last 5 years since we've been meeting here, which unfortunately for you means, at least for some of you, means you've had to listen to me for 39 times, and this will be the 40th. Maybe some of you are thinking, well, only 40? It feels like a lot more than that. But seriously, over those 5 years, we've seen so many things happen as we have journeyed together as a community. We've seen people get introduced to Jesus for the first time. We've seen people being baptized and make a public declaration that they're going to build their lives on the firm foundation of God. I've seen my own children grow up within this community and find places to serve and places to belong. Friendships are formed. But above all, I can say the common thread through it all is that God has proved himself faithful time and again. And let's be honest, it hasn't always been all celebrations and victories, right? We've had to walk the path of pain many times together, but we have journeyed together. And you see, buildings matter. Why? Because of what God does in them. In this space, what has happened here? It's not because this space is somehow special, but because God has dwelt amongst us and done something in us and through us. But a building was never the source of what God was doing. You see, our greatest hope isn't in this place or even in the next place where we'll meet. It's in the God who goes with us. The God who has been faithful here, who have we seen him move and work faithfully over the last 5 years or so that we've been here. It's the same God who we believe is already preparing what's next for us. So thank you. Thank you for being part of the story. Thank you for being involved in this chapter, and we're excited to see what God's going to do with us in the one to come. So back to some football. So at this stage in the World Cup, something has changed. You see, nobody's talking about possession stats anymore, how much of the ball each team has had. And nobody remembers the qualifying matches for the World Cup now. They're long forgotten. And even those who won their group stage really is inconsequential anymore, because what it comes down to now is a series of moments. Whether it's that crucial penalty, whether it's that last-minute winner in extra time, or whether it's that clearance off the line to save their team, everything starts to narrow down to a single moment. And in these moments, the question isn't, well, can these people even play football? They're on the biggest stage. The question is, will they step up when the moment arrives? You see, life has moments like that too, doesn't it? Moments when we're asked to step up. Maybe it's not in front of 80,000 people. That would be quite nerve-wracking, right? But maybe these are moments in the office or around the dinner table, in the classroom, in your relationships and friendships when nobody else is watching. Moments when your character is tested. when your faith is stretched, moments when you have to decide who you're going to be. I would say these can be some of our World Cup moments. Just like a footballer stepping up to take that game-deciding penalty. The big moment isn't where the confidence is built. It's where preparation is revealed. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. What happens in the hidden places, and what happens when the spotlight comes on. Because football teams, they don't suddenly just perform because they're under pressure. In fact, they rely and fall back on their preparation and their experience. Players don't suddenly score penalties, they rely on their training. And goalkeepers don't save that last-minute equaliser because they've actually saved that very shot hundreds of times in training before. Faith can be similar to that. In our World Cup moments when we're under pressure, our daily faith, I would say, is the strength we need when we face these big moments to step up. And we see this in the life of Jesus too. I mean, before his road to the cross, we find him in the quiet of the garden praying. And before his public ministry came years of quiet obedience. The question might not be, what will I do when life gets hard? But maybe it's, who is God shaping me to become before that moment arrives? So let me show you someone who understood this long before football was ever invented, if we can imagine that for a moment, a world with no football. And in this story we're going to look at, there's a warrior who has no respect for God. And there's a giant who spent 40 days hurling insults across a valley, daring anyone to face him. And in this story, everyone assumes, they think they know how the story's going to end. But then from a quiet place, from an unsuspecting place, from the fields that nobody was watching, a shepherd boy steps forward. A boy, he shouldn't have even been there. In fact, as we'll see, his family didn't even want him there. A boy everyone had overlooked. In fact, a boy that the giant laughed at. But the thing nobody else realized, he'd been preparing for this moment his whole life. So here we go. If you've got a Bible handy, we're going to be reading from the book of 1 Samuel in the Old Testament, chapter 17. And we're going to be looking at the story of David and Goliath. I'm going to read through a few bits, but because of time, I'm going to skip over a few things in between just to help us get to what I want us to think about this morning. So this is how it begins. Let's think about this as the pre-match build-up, if you like. Now, the Philistines gathered their forces for war. I mean, who are the Philistines, just quickly? I mean, they weren't just another kind of group who were trying to incur on Israel's territory. They were a known, powerful force in the region. They had advanced technology. They had more advanced weaponry. They were feared. They'd been a long-time rival of Israel. And so when it says here, now the Philistines gathered their forces for war, Israel wasn't just thinking, well, we've got a chance here. I mean, like the big game, you think, oh, we could win. No, they'll be thinking, we've seen what they have done before to other nations. We're in for a beating. And then it says this, the Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with a valley between them. The two sides opposing each other, setting out for the showdown. And if it wasn't bad enough already that the Philistines had advanced weaponry, that they had a history of winning encounters, then the story introduces a new dimension. A champion named Goliath. I mean, even the name sounds big. It sounds scary, intimidating. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. And there's a note in my Bible which says that is about 9.5 feet. I mean, this is a big guy. He is huge. And it carries on with an explanation of what he looks like. If he wasn't intimidating enough already, he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze, weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle?" I mean, is this a joke? Have you seen me? Have you seen our army? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? He was the king at the time. He doesn't need to explain what's going on here. I'm a Philistine. And you're not. We've got the strength, you haven't. Is it not obvious? So he lays down this challenge. Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistine's words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. And that's not an unsurprising reaction, is it? What they've just been faced with, not only the might of the Philistine army, but now this champion comes out. And for 40 days, the same things happen. They stood either side of this valley, and Goliath comes out to issue this challenge. You might say the whistle blows. Goliath steps forward, but nobody from Israel wants to take the ball. And sometimes our greatest battles aren't in a sudden moment. I mean, maybe think about what have you been facing in the last 40 days, where something's come to challenge you, or in the life of someone else. Things that we hear every day and reminded of, but we're just too afraid to go and challenge. And then enter, perhaps, the unexpected substitute. From the sidelines, someone appears on the scene. Verse 12, it says, "Now David." And who's David? Well, he is the son of Jesse, and it says just a little bit later on there, Jesse has 8 sons, and David's the youngest. Now, I grew up with just an older sister, but I also grew up with 3 older stepbrothers, and I was definitely the youngest, and I was definitely the weakest. And I can't imagine having 7 older brothers. I think David would have definitely felt like he knew his place, right? He was the smallest, he was the youngest. And it carries on in this passage, it says the 3 oldest followed Saul. So the 3 oldest sons, they're basically going out to war with Saul, as you would expect. But David went back and forth from Saul to tend to his father's sheep at Bethlehem. His older brothers are facing up to fight the Philistine army. And what's David's job? He's got to look after some sheep. He's been put in his place, or so everyone thinks. But then his dad gives him some instructions that carry on in verse 17. It says, "Now Jesse said to his son David, 'Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah." Wait for it. Fighting against the Philistines. We'll get to that in a second. But David's not even in the squad. He's not even been picked, right? He's got jobs to do back at home to be out of harm's way. In fact, his task is to bring the sandwiches. He's got to bring the cheese. He's bringing the kit. He is not the striker you want to bring on when you're facing that difficult moment. And I just find it, when Jesse's speaking to him, he says, your brothers are fighting against the Philistines. I mean, we just go back, they're standing on the other side of the valley. It says they're quivering, they're terrified. Doesn't seem to be much fighting going on as far as I can work out. But that's his perspective. They're doing the fighting work, but David, your job is just to take them some food. Find out how they are and come back to tell me, because I'm concerned as to how they are. The story carries on. Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions. Shouting the war cry. Is this what they did every day for 40 days? Every morning they go out to their battle positions and shout out a war cry, but nobody would want to go engage because of the challenge that Goliath had laid down. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. Get this. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. I find this really incredible. You see, all these other warriors and fighters of Israel have been there for how many days we don't know, but they've listened to this insult, this challenge from Goliath. And I don't think they really registered the offense to God. And yet when David arrives, it says David heard it. And I think something's different happened there. Because as we see as the story unfolds, David's not just happy just to get up every day and hear this same insult and to retreat. He has heard what is actually going on. And sometimes when we're faced with a challenge, don't we need to invite someone else in? Because we just listen to the same thing over and over again. But sometimes we need someone else to come in to reinterpret that, to really hear what's going on. And again, it reiterates, whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. It's not looking good for Israel at this stage. It is not looking good. They're looking for a volunteer to come and fight him. And if he loses, not only is that volunteer going to die, but he also die knowing that he's now subjugated his entire nation to the Philistine army. Nobody really wants that as the memory of their life, right? And so they're in this stalemate. How long will this go on for? And if we read on, we're not going to do it now, but you can read on, because then his brothers start to give him a hard time. They're saying, well, why are you here? Go away, kind of irritating little brother. Go back to the sheep, what you're supposed to be doing. We're doing serious business here. But he's not deterred. And in fact, David then gets to speak to Saul, the king. And it's incredible what he says. Verse 32, David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Sometimes we need to hear those words. He's saying this Philistine isn't worth losing heart over. This challenge that you're facing, sometimes you need someone else's voice in there to say, this is not the moment to lose heart. Because he's heard, he's interpreted it in a different way. And then he says, your servant will go and fight him. How high is David compared to 9.5 feet high, covered in armor? Saul replies in what only would be surely the response most of us would honestly give. You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are little more than a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth. See, Saul just looks on the outside. Saul just sees a boy and he sees a giant and he sees no way to line up the two. Maybe you've had that in your life where somebody said, you're not able to do this. You're not experienced enough. You don't have the background. You don't have the qualifications. God says something differently. So what's David's reply? Does he scuttle off, feeling down? Actually, maybe he just thinks, well, I'll just look at the situation again. Yeah, actually, what was I thinking? This is ridiculous. This giant and me. But God has done something in him. This is his reply. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. David's experience, his faithfulness, his obedience, being the youngest, giving the menial tasks, look after the sheep. I mean, he would have been surely justified as a young lad looking after sheep when a lion or bear comes to take one, that he would let them go. That he wouldn't have challenged them and risked his own life. I mean, would his father have even said, there's no good involved. I don't want to lose a son. I'd rather lose a sheep than lose you. But no, he has been faithful. He was given a task to look after his father's sheep. And see the symbolism now when a new threat comes to the nation of Israel to carry it off, just like the sheep, to take it away. It's not a lion or a bear, it's a giant in Goliath, but it's coming to do the same thing. And what David's saying through this is, I've done this before. The lion and the bear that came to take away that sheep is really the same as this Philistine who comes to take away our nation. And not only does he say that I have dealt with this before, but he finishes with this, the Lord who rescued me. He's saying not because I overcame them in my strength. He acknowledges that God rescued him from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. What faith! What faith! To look back at his history, to look back at where he'd been faithful, where God had been faithful to him and say, I'm going to stand on this because I know the character of God. He will rescue me in this. See, God had already been preparing David. He didn't just pick this boy out of nowhere who had no background. He found someone who had already lived a life of faithfulness, who had already seen the challenges before them when there was no crowd, when there was nobody there, when there was probably no praise, when there was probably no cup to lift or victory to celebrate. But he had been faithful. And through that faithfulness, he'd learned that God had been faithful. And so now, why wouldn't he say, God will rescue me from this moment? When we face those challenges, we can look back on our story of God's faithfulness in our lives. So why wouldn't he rescue me in this moment? Why wouldn't he be with me? Then the story carries on. Then he took his staff. First of all, credit to Saul. He hears this. And despite looking on the outside, he obviously must catch something I think, well, no one else is volunteering, and I'm the king, and I don't fancy it too much either. So this guy seems pretty plucky. Let's give him a go. We don't have anyone else. I don't know what he's thinking. But he says to him, go ahead. So then David took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Can you imagine? Imagine this scene. It's almost like the game is going to kick off. Let's see what happens on a 1v1. So this is how the story continues. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. I find that incredible. This giant, the symbol of power and might and authority, sees this boy. And it says he despises him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. That's kind of a scary threat. But David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you. Listen to this. He doesn't say what weapons he has. I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. He's saying, I'm not going to fight in the same way you're going to fight. You turn up huge with all this armor on, this huge weaponry, looking intimidating, shouting things across at us. I'm not going to fight in that way. I don't need to. I can't. Look at me. How can I fight in that way? I'm going to fight in the way that I know how, which is through the power and the strength and the ultimate victory of God. This day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands. What a prayer to pray if you want this one. And I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day, I'll give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals. See, he's reusing his language, right? Goliath just said he's going to feed him to the birds and the wild animals. And David's saying it's going to be the other way around. Wait for it. The whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And now comes that big moment. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. David runs, he slings his stones, and Goliath falls. There's no need for a VAR review. There's no debate. It's over. So then what happens? When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Now they're full of fear. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of the gates of Ekron. Israel surges forward. Victory spreads. See, one person's courage inspired everyone else. When one person steps up, everybody starts moving. So what can we learn from this story? Well, it's more than just about facing giants. The first thing is the opposition looks bigger than you. This can be so true. Maybe you face something in your life which just seems like a giant. I mean, Goliath looked unbeatable, right? To everybody there, he looked towering. His stats were impressive. He had previous victories. And little David, he appeared to have none. And why was everyone afraid? I mean, it wasn't just because Goliath was big. It was because everyone was looking at the giant. But David, he was looking at God. Because David had seen God work before. When he'd been faithful, he had seen God working before. That is the difference. See, fear can make your problems seem bigger than God. But faith reminds you that God is bigger than your problems. It doesn't erase those challenges, doesn't make them just go away. But we need to get them in the right focus. The next point, the preparation that nobody saw. See, I don't think this story is really just about a giant. It's about the shepherd. See, David had already learned responsibility and courage, dependence on God, perseverance, obedience through what God had given him to do, his father's tasks. And he wasn't performing in front of crowds. He was just in front of a flock of smelly sheep. You see, in the valley, it was public, it was exciting, and everyone remembered what happened. But in the fields, it was hidden, it was ordinary, and it was forgotten. So what fields are you serving in? What fields are you serving in? Where the faithfulness to what God has called you to do will prepare you to step up. When David faces the giant, see, the moment, it doesn't demand a different God. It just reminded him to trust the one he'd been walking with all along. We need to remember that when we face these challenges, when we're called to step up, we don't need God to be something different. We have to remember his faithfulness in our life. Third point, the faith that everybody saw. I think this is less about being brave, saying, I'll try. I think it's about being ready. God prepared him for that moment. David didn't suddenly become a different person. He was the same David he'd always been. He'd seen these challenges and he tackled them. He trusted God with sheep. Now he's able to trust God with the giant. I mean, imagine trusting God with something like that. Stepping up, stepping in to that place to face off that giant and having that confidence that God will rescue you. I mean, it doesn't mean we need to go out and slay an enemy. But perhaps what we do need to do is create some space tomorrow and the day after that, to come to God, to have an honest conversation with God in prayer, maybe for the first time, to open his word, to reread these stories, to choose forgiveness instead of resentment. Trust God with a difficult decision, or maybe just being faithful with the ordinary things we've already been given. So what are you doing today that is preparing you for tomorrow? Let's think about the Israelites. See, they wanted courage without the preparation. And when the moment came, it wasn't there. But David, he already had the preparation before courage was required. That's why he was different. So let's be honest. This week, probably not going to face a 9.5-foot giant. Haven't seen too many of them walking around. And you probably might not be standing before a king. And you might not save a nation. Although maybe someone might do it on Wednesday evening, but maybe. But tomorrow morning, you will wake up. And you'll have another, perhaps ordinary day. And that's where God does most of his work. That's where our character grows. That's where trust deepens. That's where faith becomes real when the rubber hits the road. That's where tomorrow's victories begin. So will you make that time to give to God, to listen to him, to have honest prayer? Maybe if you've never done it before, maybe that's your moment, the first time to speak to God. When the crunch comes, will you choose integrity, even when no one is looking? Will you forgive more quickly than you have before? Will you trust God in the ordinary things? See, Jesus, he spent 30 years in relative obscurity. 30 years. Before only 3 years of his public ministry. He wasn't in a hurry. God's not in a hurry with us. See, we often want spectacular moments. Moments like David, maybe not facing the giant, but we'll like the victory part of that. But we think that our faith is built really in the spectacular moments when, we can be thinking, well, when's my moment to step up? But I believe God is actually interested in faithful people, because the faithfulness of David is what made him ready to step up in that moment. David didn't wake up one morning, decide, today I'm going to be a giant killer, I think. Just read up on what's involved. No, he simply decided day after day to be faithful with what God had given him. And one day, the field was changed for a valley. And the sheep, well, they were swapped out for this giant and the nation he came to protect. But the sling was still the same, and David also knew that God was still the same. So maybe that's what God is inviting us into this week. Not to go around chasing giants, not to wait for a dramatic moment, but to be faithful today, because faithfulness today prepares us for tomorrow. Let's pray. God, I thank you for the wealth and depth of these stories within your word that we have to draw on. And that we see through them such real human people that we can relate to with all their brokenness, all of their mistakes. And yet we see people who inspire us not to be great, but to be faithful to a great God. And the way he makes his greatness known is through our lives. God, would you help us? Would you help us to be faithful to you? Doing the ordinary things and what it means to follow you. God, I pray for anyone here who feels like they are facing a giant and they feel underprepared, unprepared. They look at the scale of it and just can't imagine how this could change. I pray that they would know that God is with them. That you would find the strength of God in that situation. That you would invite someone else in, that they may hear it differently, they may see it differently to you. Maybe it's something that you've just been putting up with for too long. God's saying this morning, no more. Stop staring across the valley in fear. Maybe you need to invite God's voice in so that you hear what is happening. So God, I thank you, Lord, that you don't call us to be superstars that somehow have it already figured out. You just call us day by day to follow you. And through that quiet obedience, you build in us a faith that can face the giant. A faith that will declare and know that you are always with us, whatever comes our way. A faith that keeps us rooted and built on you. Thank you, Lord. Amen. Right, this week's locker room challenge for you to take away is, what daily habit will you practice this week?